Okay, we want to bring our political analysts back in to discuss the national stage and talk a little bit more in depth about our congressional races as well.
Yeah, we're joined again by Dr. Karen Holt, a professor at Virginia Tech, and Aaron Van Allen, a professor at Liberty University. Guys, again, we appreciate you spending up this time with us. Want to ask you, we've been watching the newsroom, keeping an eye on all these races across the country. What have you guys seen that surprised you or caught your eye so far tonight?
I think number one, one thing that we've been looking at all night has been the 7th congressional race for Spanberger. And the reason I think that a lot of people were really looking at that was because if you look at the newly drawn 7th congressional district, that was one that Biden would actually have won by about 5 to 7 points. But then you go and look at Governor Glenn Youngkin, he would have won that by about 6 to 7 points within 2021. So a lot of people were wondering what was going to happen there. And it has not proven to disappoint with the thrills that it's had throughout the evening. So that's one that we've been looking at. And then also, obviously, the 10th congressional district as well with Jennifer Wexton. So, but especially the 7th, I think, has been one we've been focused in on.
You know, in looking at that Spanberger race, you know, early on in the polls, it was showing that she was down, but as more votes come in, she's going up a little bit. You guys were looking at some of the last precincts that were reporting that really had an impact there.
It seems like some of the later reporting precincts, and it takes a while for numbers of votes to be counted, are in Prince William County, and that looks like a county that may be more supportive on balance, so not entirely, but more supportive of Spanberger rather than Leslie Vega, even though Leslie Vega herself is from Prince William County. So it really varies on where the votes are coming from when they're reported. This was always thought to be a very close race, neck and neck, and that's where it's going to as we move into the evening.
We've talked a lot about the local races. On the national level, it could be days before we find out who won governor's races, Senate races, et cetera, et cetera. For the voters at home who are saying, why is that? Help them to understand that.
Yeah, so it could realistically go into maybe next Monday before we actually know the final numbers. And the reason being is if you look at a state like Nevada, so Nevada state law, you have to remember that each of these different states have their own state laws that govern how they run their elections. It's not a nationalized system, it's a state-run system. So in somewhere like Nevada, they have a situation where they can actually accept ballots so long as those mail-in ballots are postmarked by today. And so they can accept them as long as that postmark is there. And then somewhere like California can accept them well into the weekend. So we could realistically, it could be until Monday of next week until we know the final numbers for the Congress.
And at the same time, other states have laws that say you cannot start counting early ballots until Election Day. And so on the far end, waiting for those absentees to come in is postponing, pushing it back further. On the other side, a lot of states could only start counting their early ballots today. And what we saw this time around were over 45 million early votes cast around the United States. So that's why it's going to take a while. Patience is the watchword, even though I know we're all hearing that from everyone.
Another quick question to ask you tonight when we're talking about those national races. You know, in the past, Florida has been more of a purple state. You know, we're learning tonight that DeSantis is going to stay governor, Rubio is going to keep his Senate seat. Do you think that it's safe to say that now Florida is a reliably Republican state, or do you think it's still purple?
You know, I have difficulties with colors, I must say. but I think so much of this varies by the election and varies with the candidates and things like that. But I certainly would say it's at least leaning toward being more red. If that means pinkish, if not purple, I think that's where Florida is going right now.
And I think a lot of the data would actually prove that as well.
Yeah,
if you look at the number of registered voters that are within the state of Florida, those numbers, the number of registered Republicans versus registered Democrats in Florida, those numbers are as high as 700,000 more registered Republicans than there are Democrats. Now, if you go back to 2008 and you look at President Obama, he won Florida by 200,000 votes, and they had an upwards of anywhere from about 400 to 500,000 more registered Democrats than they had Republicans. That is a massive shift and a massive swing for the state of Florida. So it certainly does lean more red now than what it has.
And what that also reflects, of course, is Republicans have been far more successful in the ground game in Florida. And that means mobilizing a whole range of different kinds of voting groups in Florida, especially in South Florida, where there's been a massive change in Democratic and Republican loyalties. Final thing, of course, is that all of this always depends on turnout. We haven't yet seen where in Florida Republicans and Democrats turned out.
So you always hear the term red wave. Should there be a Republican takeover, what changes do you think that there will be made by the Republicans in power?
Well, it depends on which of the chambers of Congress, of course, that go Republican. If it's the House alone, which it looks almost certainly like it will be, what that means then is that perhaps Speaker Kevin McCarthy, perhaps someone else elected as Speaker of the House by the Republicans, will begin to take a series of steps that will do things like try to roll back some of the legislative steps that the Biden administration has made. Certainly there will be more oversight of Republican or Democratic dominated agencies. There may even be threats to impeach the president and threats to impeach Attorney General Garland. If they take over the Senate, then probably everything comes to a stop in Washington in many ways. No matter what happens, if the Republicans take over one chamber or the other, we are going to have a debt ceiling fight, and that means there are going to be lots of problems moving forward as we go into next calendar year.
And the end item is that President Biden is still the president. So
yes.
Even if they do in fact take control of Congress, he still has the power of the veto.
The power of the veto, the power of executive orders, and the courts are there as well. So a whole range of things could happen, but there'll be some continuities as well. But the 2024 election starts probably January 3rd.
Real quick, I do want to get your guys' take on this. We've been asking people to weigh in on what sent them to the polls tonight, and the largest portion of voters, again, saying inflation was that big issue. Here's a look at those numbers. What do you guys think looking at this?
We see 43% of people who weighed in for our poll today said that they were voting on the economy and inflation. Behind that was the future of democracy. That was 29%. And then kind of tied there 14 and 14, violent crime and abortion.
Very quickly, that the future of democracy was second catches my attention. I would not have necessarily thought that would have beaten out violent crime, maybe immigration, and certainly maybe not abortion rights. But that's telling as well that there are a range of people that are concerned about where the country is going. And we see that in poll results from both Republicans and Democrats.
Absolutely. And the inflation, I'm not surprised with it all. But as was mentioned, it is in fact, you have folks that are talking about the future of democracy. There are Democrats and Republicans that are drastically worried about that. So not surprised to see those numbers at all.
Do you think that more people turned out to vote because of inflation, or, you know, obviously that's our local poll. And so we know voters in our area, that's what they're talking about. On the national level, though, do you think it was more about the economy, or do you think it was more about, hey, we're worried about democracy, we're going to vote right along party lines, it doesn't matter what this person believes?
I'm going to go with fundamentals, and I'm going to say what drives people out to vote in a midterm election is going to be the state of the economy and their feelings about the current president of the United States.
I'm going to say something very similar. I think people vote with their wallets. Most of the time people will go along with social issues, but once the wallet starts getting hit, that's when they start mobilizing.
All right. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you both for being here with us on this busy night. We appreciate it.
Some great insight.
Thanks for having us.
If